Hello and welcome to our Beyond B Corp webinar with Nimbus Hosting. I am joined today by Neil Russell-Bates from Hilltop Sustainability. Hello, Neil. I will get Neil to introduce himself shortly, but I will just give some context to the webinar, which is really that not all agencies aspire to become B Corps, and whether that's a personal preference, maybe constraints on time and resource, or other factors that may be considered, that there may be alternatives out there that you want to look at, but you still may want to be sustainable. And I know that businesses are increasingly sort of recognizing the significance of sustainability and environmental responsibility, and they're demanding agencies perhaps demonstrate their commitment to these principles. So what I wanted to do is bring some expert in, Neil himself, who is very much an expert in sustainability and consulting in that area for large and small companies. So I will let Neil introduce himself, and then we're going to fire some questions in to Neil to see how we can work out what else is out there to prove your commitment to the environment. Neil, over to you.
Thanks, Mike. Good morning. Great to be here. Thanks for inviting me along. So a quick introduction. Hilltop, my business and myself, we are fundamentally focused on two key areas. One is things like exactly this kind of topic, sustainability, accreditation and certification, and helping businesses that are going through that process through a variety of different media and means. And the other one is a lot about carbon. So carbon measurement, auditing, accounting, footprinting, reduction plans, net zero planning, all that kind of stuff. So those are, my two key areas. And as you say, there's, this area of certification, accreditations, veritable minefield in terms of there are just so many different marks and schemes that are around, and it can be quite confusing knowing which ones are right, which ones are appropriate for your business. And then how to negotiate your way around them once you take the plunge and decide to get involved. So happy to chip in my two pennies worth.
Well, great. Well, look, thanks for jumping on, and thanks for those who have jumped on to listen to us. If you want to ask questions, you can ask questions in the chat and throughout. That's not a problem. So first question, we may as well kick it off with what does having a sustainable business mean, and then also what are the benefits of being sustainable?
Well, I think it's interesting because when you ask that question, a lot of people go, well, surely a sustainable business is one that can turn a profit and keep in business. That's what sustainable means, especially to a lot of entrepreneurs, because that's what's key. And profit is definitely a part of it. I think the simplest definition, which gets used, is the three Ps. Basically people, planet, profit. So it's a business that's making. I've seen it written that they're having the least negative impact on the environment or people and society and what have you. But I think that's quite a negative way to look at it, really. I think, a true sustainable business is having a positive, should be measuring on what positive impact it's having on people and society, the environment, and, and still making a profit, because it does have to ultimately sustain itself. And I think that's one of the critical things when I'm talking to businesses about sustainability and why they should bother. It's because ultimately the ones that do care and take the right steps and measures on the sustainability front, it's also no coincidence that they tend to be the ones that are thriving, doing well, and turning a profit and making a good future for themselves. So the two go hand in hand as far as I'm concerned. And and it's not just my opinion. There's plenty of studies, McKinsey studies, etc., out there which will back that up and say, the businesses that are doing best over the last 5 years, for example, are those that are taking sustainability seriously. So Yeah, that's in a nutshell what's important about it.
What do you think that? Why do you think that is happening though? Why do you feel that those businesses are ahead, and also sort of, I don't know, making profitable businesses and things like that? Is it because they have other things that they're prioritizing? Are they doing the people, planet, profit, and they're making sure that it's all intertwined with one another, or what sort of makes them stand out to those who perhaps haven't?
Well, I think there's two or three things. I mean, as someone who spent a lot of time, as I say, working in carbon measurement, management, etc., one of my pet sayings is, where there's carbon, there's cost. So, a business that is managing its carbon footprint and managing its carbon is usually reducing its costs. You think of the things that contribute to a carbon footprint. A lot of it is burning stuff, so burning energy, burning fuel in vehicles or whatever. If you're doing less of that and reducing your carbon footprint, you're spending less on fuel, you're spending less on petrol and diesel in vehicles, etc. So often those two go hand in hand, and those are a couple of simple examples, but there's many others. It could be that you're changing the lighting in your offices from old-fashioned fluorescent strips to LED lighting. It's a good thing from your carbon footprint point of view, but your bills come down at the same time. Obviously, once you get through that initial upfront investment and making the change. So there's a straight economic thing. Then I think there's a perception thing, and again, a lot of surveys will come out with statistics. 75% of consumers will make a sustainable choice if it's given to them. So, by putting sustainability at the forefront and the center of what you do, what your business does, you're appealing to, if you're working directly with consumers, to consumers. And guess what? If you're a B2B business, then somewhere down the line, you're working, your end clients are working with consumers. They're trying to keep them happy. So if you're keeping them happy, it's good for your business. And then, from a legislative point of view, there's also that front, which is, and even if the legislation isn't hitting you as perhaps as a small business or agency at the moment, again, it's beginning to make an impact on your clients. So they're then seeking businesses to work with in their supply chain that have got all the right sustainability credentials. And Bob's your uncle, to stay on the roster, to get business, you need to be sustainable. Those are the ones who are thriving and doing well, because they can meet all the needs in those RFQs and say, look, here's our accreditation here. Look, this is all the stuff we're doing. This is what we're measuring. That's our performance. So it's good for business from that point of view.
Yeah. And do you find, I think, well, two questions really. One is, it doesn't sound like it's just for large companies. It sounds like it's for any company. But I suppose if you're an agency sat there with a very small team, is it going to take a long time? Is it going to be quite resource hungry, do you think, to do all this? I mean, how do you help your clients with that side of things?
Yeah, I mean, there's an awful lot of tools out there that you can use, as a small business, which will help you do this yourself. So all of it is doable for a business. It's about, prioritizing and managing, versus your workload and where this fits into your to what you're doing. But you don't need to be spending thousands with consultants like me to get yourself across the line. We're here to help, and people like me are around, and we're here to help to get people to the finish line if they need that help. But often I find but let's face it, a lot of the stuff, if you're working towards a sustainability accreditation, for example, a lot of the stuff ultimately you've got to do yourself. All people like me can do is point you in the right direction and nudge you and say, right, well, have you drawn up policies that will contribute to your rating and your scoring? Look, here's a template you can use. You're still going to have to do it as a business. You're still going to have to find the time to do it, and that's where finding that motivation to do it is key. And whether you figure, well, it's because I'm going to make the business more profitable and grow quicker in the future, or whether it's just because you've got a personal passion for doing it. But there's no getting away from the fact that, you know, somewhere down the line you're going to have to put some of the effort in yourself. You can't just you know, phone it in and get someone else to do the work. Yeah.
So you mentioned accreditations there, Neil. Then what would you, I mean, how do you go about advising somebody? Because there are so many accreditations out there. You know, what would the, you know, what are some of the kinds of accreditations that we could be expecting to look at, and then how do you kind of whittle them down? Do you do one? Do you do many? What do you do on that front?
Yeah, I mean, there is a sort of no just black and white answer. That you know, I'm not going to sit here and say, okay, yeah, well, actually, what you need is to be a B Corp, or what you need is to be ISO accredited, or what have you, because it's definitely a horses for courses kind of situation. They are valuable, but I think the two things that I would, you know, questions I would normally ask to a business in that situation is number one, you know, what's your motivation? You know, because if your motivation, if you don't personally have a bit of a passion, a bit of a care about sustainability, some of these things are going to be a bit harder, because you're going to go, oh, why am I doing all this kind of work for this? So you know, that's one consideration. The other one is, you know, what is it you need and your clients need, because, you know, there is a school of thought that says if a business is going to go through one of these as a box ticking exercise, is it worth it? My point of view is, if this moves the needle at all as a business, and you start doing something positive and something good, regardless of whether it's because you're doing it for you know, a client benefit or your own, it doesn't matter. You're still moving. You're still doing something more positive. So
yeah.
But you know, so when it comes to clients, you know, talking to them, and you know, they may be very explicit and say, oh yeah, to work with us, you need to have this you know, accreditation.
And do you see that drive? Do you see that when you're talking to clients, that you're seeing that's driven by their end client to say, hey, you must have this accreditation if we're going to work with you?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It turns up in RFQs and RFIs in you know, all the time now, I would say. Right. There's you know, whether it's government tenders, you know, if you're pitching for business with, you know, any council, NHS, body, whatever. But you know, also if you're, you know, working on behalf of just a larger business, that you know, and they're issuing out stuff invariably now, there'll be something in there, and it might be as basic as, you know, do you have a sustainability policy? What, you know, what share of what it is, through to you know, you need to have an EcoVadis rating, or you need to have ISO 9000, what, you know, whatever. So they're and I would say more and more also, you know, have you got a carbon reduction plan in place, or a net zero plan? Those are becoming more important. And again, that's a trickle down effect of legislation, because the you know, it's now being legislated that the bigger businesses, not just PLCs, but you know, the next tier down as well, got to have a net zero plan. So of course, you know, that net zero plan won't work unless their supply chain are on board with that as well. So it becomes a requirement, and you'll see it. Sure. You know,
how much of it do they require? Do you think that you see that they require to have completely sewn up? Because I feel like this stuff is still new. We're all still working stuff out. So when people are putting those into pitch documents and tenders and all the rest of it, it might be, I mean, it's fairly definitive. You've either got an ISO or not. But if somebody's saying, hey, what's your carbon reduction plan? Do you need to have had a piece of software to say, I've analyzed everything and here it is? Or how do you go about with some of this stuff? Where is the line between it's okay to be on a journey versus, no, I need a definitive thing that says I'm this?
Yeah, and again, it'll vary from business to business. I was working with a client recently who's in turn, their client is a big pharmaceutical company, and they were very black and white. you need to be signed up on this program, and certified by them by this date, or we're not working together, so that, and there was kind of zero flexibility. Others are much more, okay, yeah, so you're working towards that, that's great, you can demonstrate action, you can demonstrate. So it's very much again, going back to rehashing the same phrase, horses for courses. But and I would say with the certifications that are out there, again, while clients may ask for one, there's often the opportunity to say, well, we don't have that one, but we have this one, and it meets the same sort of criteria as this. Surely that's good enough. That that's going to tick all the boxes, because otherwise you could be chasing around for multiple different accreditations, and you will just end up feeling like, well, what am I doing here? I'm just chucking money at this, to tick somebody's boxes and keep their business. What's the point of that? And I'd agree with that. Does feel pretty pointless. So having some sort of dialogue with them and saying, look, come on, we can demonstrate this ticks all the right boxes for you. That surely is good enough.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And then in terms of, this webinar's titled Beyond B Corp, but it would be helpful perhaps to know, to just put in context the difference between being B Corp certified, going through that process, versus having some form of specific sustainability, or just being environmentally sustainable as a business versus being a B Corp business. What's the difference there?
I think there's probably a couple of questions there. So, when you compare something like B Corp to other accreditations, and we mentioned EcoVadis or ISO 9000, those are ISO, for example, is an environmental management system. So it's very much environment orientated, and it's very much about systems and processes. In my personal opinion, it's quite dry. It's lots of paperwork and reports. Comparatively, something like B Corp is a much more holistic thing. It's not just looking at environment, it's looking at the social context. What are you doing for communities and people, your people, as well as other external stakeholders? It's really taking a much more rounded approach, and it's much more of almost a philosophy. What's your purpose, rather than just, are you doing X, Y, and Z with your waste, recycling, energy management, etc. So it becomes much more sort of a way of running your business, and you see it in when businesses are on their journey to becoming B Corp, and when they achieve B Corp status. There's a generally quite a buzz about those businesses. They're quite excited about it, and it has that a far more emotive feeling, I would say. So it's a different thing. Another important distinction, I think, with something like B Corp is, you get a B Corp score. You've got to get a certain score to hit B Corp status, but then there is a score beyond that, and it's a constant journey. They're reappraised every 3 years to make sure they're moving forward, rather than just we got it, we got our certificate, shove that in a drawer, and let's just crack on with what we're really here for. Those I would say that you don't have to be a B Corp to have that philosophy, because it is more of a philosophy and purpose thing. If that's your bag, and that's you care about it, and you communicate that effectively with the outside world, that can be just as effective as being a B Corp. A B Corp just puts a stamp on it and says, oh yeah, other people have kind of looked at that and audited it and said, yeah, you really are doing the right thing. So I wouldn't say there's any obligation, to have to, and B Corp doesn't tend to be one of those so much that's kind of demanded. Because it does take a different approach, but it's also not an inexpensive one to do. you know,
No.
as,
In
as
time
something.
as well, I guess, and time and cost. I suppose
Yeah.
it's something that's more holistic. I suppose
Mm.
it's a more deeper sort of dive into all areas of the business to see how it's performing, and as you say, also outside of the business, where it's the people and all the rest of it, and how you're dealing with the planet, but other bits and pieces where it's quite involved, I suppose. Whereas I suppose things like ISO certification, I suppose what we should help is you've mentioned EcoVadis a few times in ISO. There may be some people on here going, I don't know what those mean, so maybe just give us a bit of an overview of what those are, Neil. That would be quite helpful.
Yeah. So as I say, ISO is a very much an environmental. The particular one we're talking about is 14,001. That's very much environmental management system. So it is for systems and processes within your business, and how they're oriented to deal with environmental issues. EcoVadis is a sort of halfway house between the two. So EcoVadis will again score you across 4 different pillars, as they call it. One of which is the environment, but the other one is workers' rights and what have you, ethical procurement. So this is again a more rounded, slightly more holistic approach to things, and you have to demonstrate various different aspects of business, and it will, like B Corp, the questionnaires you get and the questions you'll be answering will be specific to the sector you work in and the kind of business you have. So for some businesses, they will weight your labor policy areas higher than your environmental, because in digital world, for example, you're not manufacturing, then you're not running factories or whatever. It is much more about people than because your environmental impact was potentially less. So it is, and again, EcoVadis is something where you get a scoring. They give out ratings of bronze, silver, gold, and platinum for the very top tier. So it has similar advantages in that respect to B Corp, but it lacks that sense of being part of a movement, if you like, which is how people often describe it as, when they're in B Corp. Very much a sort of procurement led kind of thing, and again, every business I think I've worked with on EcoVadis, bar one, has done it because it's been a requirement of their clients saying, yeah, you must have an EcoVadis rating to work with us, and even you must have a gold rating, for example, in some cases. So,
different ratings. How long do those typically take to go through that process for an EcoVadis or an ISO?
I mean, it very much depends how much resource you put into it and where you're starting from. If you've already doing the right things and have, and some of them will feel almost inevitably, for all of these things will feel like, oh, there's 3 of us in the business. Is it really essential that we have an ethical business policy and a bribery and corruption policy in our business? There's just the 3 of us here, and so there's a bit element of jumping through hoops that where you almost certainly won't have those things, but you kind of need to put them in place to satisfy people, and they are a good basis to grow from, because although it seems like a pain in the neck at the time, once you've got it in place, as you grow and get bigger, and suddenly you're 100 people. Oh yeah, no, we have all that. Yeah, we're the professional outfit that's got it. So it's not a bad discipline, but it will feel at times a bit, oh really, So
I think because we're going through the B Corp process, and what was interesting is when we didn't find it as frightening or laborious as we thought, because actually we do have some of these processes and some of these things that we've already done, and we're like, oh, we've already got that, we already do this, and that's quite nice. And I did find the interface quite easy to use and put all the information in and stuff, so it wasn't that daunting. But I do wonder whether now that we fill this thing, it sort of goes into a bit of a black hole and takes them time, and now we've got to prove it all. We've got to make sure that we can prove everything we said in the surveys that they ask, so that's maybe where the time's going to go. But I'd be interested in seeing how far that goes down. But I
think the other thing that to say on that is even B Corp, once you get B Corp status or you get EcoVadis or whatever, especially with these ones which you've got scoring and what have you, it's just the first step. And actually that sometimes, there's this huge celebration and, relief when you've got it. But actually the hardest bit is often then moving it on, because right, you've done all the basics. Now you've got to keep moving forward and keep it. Hopefully it becomes addictive for a business. You're like, yeah, come on, we need to, because all these things are public. Once you get your B Corp status, anyone can go on the B Corp website and see what your score is and compare it to other businesses, see what your report is. So hopefully it becomes a thing where we need to keep up. We need to, and that's when it gets harder. It's like, okay, we did have, like you said, we had a lot of that stuff already, but now all of this other stuff that we need to move the score up is new. And okay, now we got to really put some effort in. And when you companies with scores over 100 on B Corp, so 80 will get you B Corp, as you know. But once you see companies getting up into the hundreds, they're really worth a look at, because they are going the full 9 yards.
Which is nice to see. I think we got a little bit like that with our carbon audit, which was nice to see. To see where we're sort of are producing our carbon, and then you can get all excitable about how you can then we could do this, we could reduce that, we could change that, and we looked at loads of different things to try and reduce that down. I liked your where there's carbon there's cost as well, because some of the things we've done, like investing in solar panels and our batteries that we've invested in, that has cost us more than maybe just switching to a greener provider of energy, but we wanted to do that for our own reasons. So there are some things you weigh up maybe for cost versus how passionate you are for some of these things. But like the lighting and other bits, changing taps internally, to make sure we've got less water going through. We wouldn't have done that if we hadn't audited it and had a look at how much we're using and all that sort of stuff. So you do need to have a bit of visibility, I think, on, like you say, the scoring systems are helpful, or the production of here's all your carbon. I didn't realize that there was different carbon footprints of pizza toppings and things, if you want to get really granular. But that's interesting in itself. I think what I want to talk quickly as well about is perhaps legislation, Neil, as well. So is it coming? Should we be worried about it? And if so, what do you feel is coming our way?
Well, again, as a carbon man, then you won't be surprised to hear that's I'm all over what's going on there, and that's quite fundamental. It's quite key. As I say, large businesses have got to report their carbon footprint, but beyond that, they've now got to report on what they're doing about reducing it and getting to net zero, and setting net zero targets. Again, it's, as you said, the measuring your carbon in the first place is one thing, but actually following through on actions to reduce it and having a net zero target. And if you sign up to something publicly like Science-Based Targets Initiative, for example, and again that's public, people can see, they're signed up on that, I wonder how they're getting on. It becomes a great motivator for making sure you follow through on these things. So that all helps. That'll, for sure.
Is net zero what is net zero, and also what is carbon neutral? Because I think sometimes those things are a little bit confusing.
Well, carbon neutral. You may see less and less talk about that soon, because it's that for those people who've followed it in the press this year in particular, there's been quite a bit of controversy about carbon offsetting, because fundamentally carbon neutral meant that, without getting into too much detail, there are different scopes of emissions, but the scope 1 and 2 emissions that you have as a business, which are under your control, you would measure those. You then offset the equivalent amount of carbon, by investing in offset schemes. You could become certified as carbon neutral. One of the leading bodies and organizations that have provided that certification service, this week, Carbon Trust announced that they're dropping that carbon neutral badge and certification, for precisely because, well, not only because there's been some controversy around the offsets and how valid some of those are, but also because there's a recognition that for some businesses, for possibly too many businesses, it was a way of going, oh look, we're carbon neutral, we're just going to carry on doing what we always done, business as usual, without making real inroads into reducing carbon. And that's what's going to get us to net zero. So net zero is about absolute reduction of emissions. So if our baseline is here at 2019 levels or whatever, it means that by 2050 latest, we will get emissions down to less than 10% of what they were in our baseline year. And as a country, we have that as an official target. Whether we're on course to meet it is another controversial one for debate. But that's the fundamental difference. So, you know, net zero is an active thing to participate in. It's doing what you were just saying with your carbon footprint. What can we do to actually reduce it? Let's put the solar panels in. Let's put the, you know, change the lighting. Let's do these things and watch our emissions get down to that sort of 10% or less figure.
Yeah. Carbon
neutral was a much more passive thing. Yeah, we emit this, but we offset there, so it's all good. And I'd say carbon neutral is going to start, you know, becoming less and less of a discussed one.
Well, how is it then? So for somebody, for us as a business, we use carbon neutral as a term because we feel like we've reduced quite a lot, and then we've obviously offset. So for a business that's done that, and I was a bit skeptical about net zero when I spoke to a consultant at the time, because it felt like you could take any point in time past, and say that's our baseline, so therefore we'll be then this at this point. So the guy that talked to me gave me a really extreme case, was like, if the army's at war at one point, you know, they're emitting loads of carbon, and then they're not, that's a massive reduction of carbon. So maybe that's an extreme, but it's helpful to show that there's, I don't know, I felt like you could play the game a little bit like you could play the game with carbon neutral. I mean, our motivation isn't necessarily just to offset and be done with it. I'm sure there are those businesses that do. We're trying to reduce it, but carbon net zero, does it mean that they have to be absolutely zero by the end of it? How long does it have to take? And do you think will it end up being a little bit more like the carbon neutral conversation, where people are just overusing the net zero, never really achieving it? I suppose I've asked loads of questions there, Neil, but I'm just
I mean, will if you put a system in place, will people try and play the system? Definitely. Yeah. I mean, I don't think you're going to get away with that, but they're trying to sort of you know, tighten that up in recognition that, you know, potentially offsets are just, you know, and by the way, you know, doing offsetting is never a bad thing to do.
Right.
You know, and I'm not here to say don't offset. It's absolutely something that we should be doing as individuals and businesses, but it's not going to get us there, because we've got to reduce the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. Otherwise, you know, climate change is just going to, you know, we've seen all the evidence of climate change going on around us this year, from, well, right now, this crazy heat wave that we're experiencing at the moment, while, you know, in the Mediterranean they're getting swept away by floods. You know, it's all the evidence is there. So and that's not going to improve until we start really reducing the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. So that's why that's so important. You know, we could spend another hour talking about the technicalities of net zero and the baseline, but you know, to take your example of an army at war one year, and then next year the war's ended and their emissions drop, you have to re-baseline is the technical answer to this. Right. And there are ways of, you know, and there are mechanisms for doing that. So and similarly, you know, to businesses that might be on this call, if you grow or you shrink in size, again, there are mechanisms. You know, you might hear people talk about carbon intensity ratios. So it pegs your carbon emissions to a consistent factor in your business. For a lot of businesses, that's just your turnover. So you might talk about the tons of CO2 per £1 million of turnover. That's a common intensity ratio. If you get in certain industries, they've got industry specific ones. Brewers will have tons of carbon CO2 emissions per hectoliter of beer brewed, for example.
Right.
So these are ways of pegging it that will take into account fluctuations in your business, wars, whatever. And if you acquire a business, you should be rebaselining and going, right, we're now going to adjust what our baseline was based on the fact that we've acquired this business, so that you can see really what the results are. But ultimately, yeah, it's about reducing to 90% or less. That all comes from the recognition that there are always going to be some emissions that are, quite possibly going to be impossible to mitigate and take account of.
And we're happy to offset those. We still, will they? Because there must be
yes, but that offsetting has to be very specifically carbon removal schemes, rather than just purely offsetting. So right at the moment, for example, you could you could invest in a scheme that's replacing cook stoves in in a developing country where they burn wood, with gas stoves. That would be classed as an offsetting scheme, but you're not reducing emissions. You're trying to make sure you're not extracting carbon by that. You're just trying to reduce the amount of emissions that are happening. So for net zero, that final 10% has got to be about removing carbon out of the air, so that we basically remove that 10% or whatever it is that's left out of the atmosphere. And that might be through physical carbon extraction, this carbon capture that people have probably heard about, or it could be natural processes like trees or what have you.
Okay. Fine. Well, look, I am conscious of time. I've got a couple of questions left. I think one is around greenwashing, because I think maybe people who are listening here want to avoid greenwashing and hopefully want to avoid greenwashing. What sort of advice would you give somebody to try and avoid being seen as greenwashing?
One word simply is transparency. I think let's take that example of carbon neutral. You can, if you see at the moment a claim of a business being carbon neutral, two businesses claiming to be carbon neutral, and if you just read that statement, you've got no more information to go on. How do you judge whether they're doing it right? But they could be quite different scenarios. So the narrative that goes alongside that, and what people say about what they're doing to be carbon neutral, how they define being carbon neutral. To one business, we mentioned the technical definition of carbon neutral being that you're offsetting your scope 1 and 2 emissions. And without getting into the nitty gritty of all what the different scopes are, but scope 3 is often 80% of businesses' emissions. So it might be that you're carbon neutral by definition, but you're not accounting for 80% of your of the emissions that the business is responsible for as a whole. Whereas another business might be saying, yeah, we're carbon neutral, but that means we're offsetting all of our scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. Now that's a huge difference in what's going on between those two businesses. What are you investing in to make you carbon neutral? What are your ambitions beyond carbon neutral? All of that, the more a company says about what they're doing, the more credible it becomes. The less they say, generally, the more suspicious I become. So I think, and I would say that's just a general rule, and it doesn't matter whether you're Tesco's or whether you're a two-man agency. I think there's the simplest way to get around greenwashing is to be clear, open, honest, and tell people exactly what you're doing and where you're at. With no business is perfect in this journey towards sustainability. So being open about where you are on your journey, what you've done, and what you're aiming to do. And the ones I love are the ones who are then also open about the mistakes they make along the way. Oh yeah, we tried this. We thought it was going to be a great idea. Actually, it didn't work. So now we're going to change something different. I love that, because it's like, okay, yeah, you're just being honest about it, and you're clearly trying to do the right thing, rather than a business that goes, yeah, oh, we did this one thing and it was brilliant, aren't we amazing? And and you go, oh yeah, get over your marketing selves and be just be, because this is kind of important, it's when you look at what's going on in the world, it's this stuff is actually is going to make a difference. So
yeah, I think also companies sharing those journeys help other companies not make the same mistake. They were like, oh well, it may be that it works well for another company, but they at least can view what they've done and how they've done it and gone, yeah, we learned from that and it didn't work.
And that's another great thing about the B Corp movement, because it is a movement. Rather, you'll hear them talk about the B Corp movement rather than just the B Corp scheme. And they will work with each other, B Corps, and communicate, and they will share those kind of learnings and ideas, because again, it's collaboration's kind of key to sustainability. If you're just in a dog eat dog competition, or right, we'll do our thing and they can do that, we're not gonna, this is bigger than us,
yeah, got to share. I think
yeah.
So I suppose, just drawing to a close on the webinar then, what steps would you advise an agency who's listening to this to take if they've not started anything on their environmental sustainability journey? What can they start to do? What steps should they go through?
Well, a little bit of desktop research is never a bad thing. As you know yourself, B Corp's got some great resources. You can download the B Corp impact assessment, which every business has to do as to get their score ultimately and find out if they can become B Corp. But there are I think 250,000 businesses at the moment are using that impact assessment at the moment, just to benchmark their business, see where they are, see what things they might need to do, without having had to make any commitment that they're going to become B Corp. So that's not a bad first step. Just download that, have a look and see what kind of questions they ask, and see what kind of things they're expecting a sustainable business to be. As I say, that's a great first step. Measuring your carbon, and that might be as simple as using an online tool, and just there's plenty of free ones that are actually pretty good these days. Because that's a good starting point. If you it not only is it will it help you identify areas of your business which are carbon heavy, it might identify ways to save some money. Who knows? Yeah.
Okay. And then question to you really, which is, why would somebody, people listening here, they might want some support and help. Why would they come to you? What can you help them to achieve? Especially if they've done the desk research, what would they typically expect if they were working with you?
Well, I guess, as I said, for a number of businesses, it can be a little bit overwhelming, a bit confusing. Where do I start? If you could download your B Impact assessment, start looking at that. Well, I can't answer half of these questions. I haven't got half of these things. Which are important? What do I do? So some of it can be just some hand holding. The carbon footprinting. I say it's easy and just have a look at an online tool, but some people look at that and go, no, and it depends how far you want to take it as well. If you just want to measure your electricity, what carbon footprint you get from is generated by your electricity bills and your gas bills, then that's easy enough. But if people want to take it further and do the right thing, and and then they get into Scope 3 emissions, and it's stuff that I don't have any bills for what my suppliers are doing. How do I know where do I even start to do that? That's kind of areas. And I got a conversation later with a business that's exactly that, like, that doesn't make any sense to me. What do I do? So it's just leading them. And it might be, as I've said to them, it might be we have an hour's conversation and you're like, I'm good to go, that's fine. Or it might be then you want, okay, well, just can you help us through the next bit and the next bit, and how, and so I have clients where I do half a day's work for them and they're good. They're like, yeah, great, that's me. And then I've got other clients I've been working ongoing for 5 years on all this with them. Right. And it's just they've got the basics down and they're just trying to refine it and get better and better. But yeah, it's it's an open book, really. I'm down for it all.
Well, look, thanks, Neil. Thanks for coming on. Thanks for imparting your knowledge. I found it incredibly fascinating. I like the where there's carbon, there's cost. I think people will like that. I think that will help cement it in their minds, maybe, that actually, you know, if they're not necessarily motivated by the passion to reduce, they are maybe, you know, motivated by the profit. Then that's hadn't really considered that before, which is nice. I like your people, planet, profit that you mentioned earlier as well. That's really nice that we can get through those, and aligning accreditation to what you might be passionate about as well. I think is a really important, because I think if it needs to come across genuine, you need to be passionate about it. So choosing those, but to some extent, may be dictated by your clients, and your clients requesting certain things as well, which is which could be tricky. So look, thank you very much. We haven't had any questions through. I don't know if there's any questions coming through. We'll just check. But no. Well, look, all that's left to say is thanks, Neil. Thanks for coming on, and thanks for everybody who's listened today. I really appreciate it. But yeah, bye.
Thanks very much, Mike. Bye, everyone. Cheers.